I have to let people see my humanity and I have to see theirs. So what that means is whenever I start a new job or I get a new team member, I always set a time to meet with them. And in that meeting, I don't talk about the resume. I talk about the people, being meaning myself and the other person.
My people, welcome to the Principled Minds podcast, where we bring to you a person or a message to help you uncover the core principles of making your vision for your career and personal life a reality. Relax, open your mind, and be ready to receive at least one piece of information that may encourage you to take action today. Welcome to the family. Welcome back. My name is Charles Moka Jr. I am the founder and host of the Principled Minds podcast. This episode is part of the LET series, the Lead an Effective Team series, that is focused on helping leaders manage challenges with leading effective teams, from identifying talent to cultivating an ideal culture that keeps everyone aligned and committed to meeting the objectives of your team or of your organization. Our guest today is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Chief Risk Officer of the United States Bureau of Fiscal Service. Prior to her joining the Bureau of Fiscal Service, she served as the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the United States Small Business Administration. She's also a certified life coach who has a passion for helping people live their best life and become their best self. On this particular episode, though, we discuss how to create a vision for your team or your organization, how to ensure your teammates are aligned to the vision that you have established. We also talk about how to manage instances where you have current or new team members who do not believe or align to the vision that you have established for your team or your organization, and so much more. I am incredibly excited for this episode because so much insight will be shared, and I would hate for you to miss any episodes. So I invite you to hit subscribe or follow wherever you are listening to this episode today, whether it's on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're currently engaging with this episode. I invite you to hit subscribe, to hit follow, so you will not miss the episodes that are to come. All right, without any further ado, join me in our conversation today with our guest, Erica Gaddy. Erica Gaddy, it is such a pleasure to meet you again. We have had quite a journey and quite an experience together, meeting you through the Next Wave Federal Finance Leadership Program, and just getting to know you and hear your journey and your story so far prior to us getting on this interview has been incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us at the Principled Minds podcast.
And thank you for having me as a guest. I'm always excited to share and engage with other people, especially on topics that I'm passionate about, and leadership is one of those topics.
That is wonderful. What has made you smile in the last 7 days?
Wow. You with a tough question. What has made me smile is a conversation I had with my best friend. And, we've been friends for about 35 years, so long time friendship. And we were just talking about like how we've come so far from the day we met in college, and just how life has so much exceeded what we ever thought or imagined back when we were in college, just trying to, make sure that we got good grades in all of our classes, that we were able to go to parties, and that we had enough money to get a cheesesteak every Friday. And so just thinking about being in that place and who I was at that point in time, never did I have aspirations to be where I am today. And it wasn't even a thought. I just was trying to survive my 4 years in college and trying to get out with a degree and hoping to get a job.
Wow. When you reflect on those times, what is one memory that you just can't help but remember when you think about the time that you spent with your best friend back in the days?
I think one memory that stands out was we had a riot on campus, and it was pretty intense. And I was in my dorm room, and I looked out the window and I just saw all of these people in the street. And I was like, what's going on? So instead of being safe and being wise, I put on my tennis shoes, ran downstairs, and went to see what was happening. And I just saw all this utter chaos. And it was probably one of the most frightening things I had experienced in my life. And I didn't know what was going on. And I just saw people running. I saw the police coming. And this one girl in my dorm, I can't even remember her name, but she said, we need to leave. This is getting bad. And she pulled me to safety, and we got back in our dorms. And by the time we got back upstairs, it had gotten worse, and people were getting hurt. People were fighting. It was a serious experience.
Oh my goodness. So the person that pulled you was her, your friend.
It was someone that lived on my floor. I didn't even really know her,
Mm,
but she knew me from the floor. And if it was not for her, I could have gotten injured because one of my friends got trampled and broke her ankle in 5 places.
oh my
And she
goodness.
had surgery and pins. And I think, why this story is so compelling to me is that you never know who's around you, and you never know what a blessing someone could be to you. And they probably don't even know, but they, for some reason, get a nudge or an instinct to do or say something, and it can change the trajectory of someone's life or experience.
That is so powerful. It really ties really nicely to the topic of our conversation today, which is how leaders can keep their team aligned and committed to, the vision of the organization or project. And you talk right now about, the necessity to be aware of those around you and how much of a blessing they can be. And it makes me, reflect on the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis, that oftentimes there is a possibility that you don't recognize or be aware of the contributions that they make on a day-to-day basis that may seem small to you, but quite major to someone else looking from outside, or to even the person that is helping or contributing to, the various tasks or initiatives that we have within our organization. And it kind of pushes me to wonder how important it is from your perspective for us to build that level of self-awareness in order to be able to help the people around us, one, feel recognized, feel supported. I'm curious to hear your perspective here. What do you think from your perspective would be helpful for leaders to do to remain aware of the impact that the people around them have within the organization or within the project that they're currently supporting?
So, to answer your question, it's about mindset. And what I mean by that is, as a leader, you have to first understand why you're a leader and what you're called to do. And why you're a leader has a lot to do with what you know and who you are as a person. And why you're there is because you're there to serve. And so you have to take your gifts, talents, and knowledge and use them to serve. And when I say serve, you have a duty to your organization. You have a duty to your leaders, because every leader has a leader. You have a duty to your colleagues, those who you serve with, and then your staff, those who support you. And so when you recognize that you are a servant, it creates humility. And so you don't take yourself too seriously. You don't let your ego make you believe you're more than or better than others. And so that mindset is paramount, because if you take that in everything you do, you will be effective in leading people and leading your organization.
You talk about service and the importance of for leaders to remember that one of their greatest duties is to serve. And you, I think you mentioned that so beautifully, because that's also my perspective when it comes to leadership is, if you are a leader, you're not necessarily there to tell people what to do. You're there to serve. And I think recognizing that does something great for the mindset, because it then changes how you communicate. Now, in that line of leadership, from your perspective, I believe it's important for a leader to have a vision that people will understand, a vision that people hopefully will buy into, in order that they may put in the necessary effort to move actions forward to make that vision a reality. From your perspective, how do you think organizations should go about defining or developing a vision for their project or for their organization, from your perspective?
So let's talk from an organizational perspective. You know, one of the key things to remember is that, especially in government and even in the private sector, we, in the government, where we serve the people of this country, and in the private sector, specifically publicly traded companies, they serve their shareholders. So you first have to really think about, what are the needs of the greater group of people you're serving. And then when you think about those needs, then you say, well, what do we do as an organization, and how can we take that and meet the needs of the people we serve? So that begins. And then you also have regulatory and legal requirements that you're mandated to fulfill. So you kind of lay those things out, and then you say, here's what we need to do. How are we going to do it? And the how is when you start off bringing in your senior leadership team and you collaborate, because the senior leadership team is made up of people from different functional areas within your organization. So you might have your legal team, your chief financial officer team, your technology team, your compliance team, as well as some of the programs, or in the commercial world, business lines and operations. And so they have, each of those teams have a specific function to support the organization, and they have a specific vantage point. And you need to consider all of that when creating a high level vision. Because one of the things that I think can hinder the development of a relevant vision is to not include people.
Mhm.
So you have this higher level leadership conversation, but then you kind of build that framework for your vision. But then you ask the staff, because they're the ones in the trenches day to day, and they also have a perspective that's important. So you pull all of that together to create that organizational vision. And also, by including people in the development of the mission, they can develop a sense of ownership, which is very important. And they develop that sense of why. Because for organizations to be effective, you have to have people that feel connected to the mission and vision of the organization, and they see themselves in playing a role in that. And that is a key part of leadership.
You mentioned a really good point there around the importance of including people. And I'm really curious to learn about the mistakes that you've seen a lot of leaders make around this developing the vision itself. So you mentioned one is making sure that you have your team members aligned, because in order to get them, I'm assuming, aligned and committed to the vision, they need to feel like they were probably even included in the development of that vision. Now, there are going to be instances where, some people may join the organization after the vision has been created and may or may not believe in that vision. What are some of the observations you've seen in terms of just challenges a lot of leaders have faced around developing and getting people aligned to a vision that they have already created?
I have seen leaders not have a well thought out vision. It was very narrowly scoped and it didn't cover the totality of the organization. So everyone couldn't see themselves in that vision. And so when you have that happen, some people began to feel like my work is not significant. So why bother? And so then you cause people to disengage. And then when you see the implications of them becoming disengaged, when things aren't getting done or they're not getting done well, leaders then see how important that role is to the operations and the vision. And then it's kind of too late. And I've also seen a lack of sharing of the vision. The vision should be known by everyone in the organization. And sometimes people feel, people have felt like this is just a leadership issue. So this stays within the leadership. Again, not consulting the staff who see things differently, who have a very unique perspective, and who are doing the lion's share of the work to achieve the vision. So you pretty much left out your core workforce.
So one is a narrowly scoped vision, and two is lack of sharing. So those are some of the key challenges you've seen, or mistakes you've probably seen a lot of leaders make when creating a vision. I'm wondering, for someone who is a project leader who has never led a project before and have been given a new role or responsibility to stand up an initiative from the scratch. And part of that is being able to define a vision for that team, or probably mission for that team that they're going to lead. What are some of the practical steps that they would have to take in order to develop that vision to kick off that initiative or project?
So from a project perspective, the new project leader should really understand the project. What am I being asked to do? And how does that fit into the bigger organizational picture? They also need to understand who else either impacting the project or impacted by the project, because those are going to be your stakeholders. They're going to be people and organizations that you might need to engage with throughout the duration of developing and implementing this project, for their insights, to make sure you don't have blind spots, to make sure that things work in accordance to what's necessary to provide the results of this project. And so then you take all that information and you start to really work on your project plan. You know, what are the things, what are the tasks that are going to lead me to this end? What's the duration? Who needs to be involved on a day-to-day basis? How do I communicate progress? What is my escalation process? When things are starting to kind of seem like they're going off the rails, who do I call? Who do I inform? And also understanding how do you handle situations where people don't meet deadlines? Because your project is task and deadline driven, and they're heavily dependent on the completion of one task to support the completion of another. And so that is something that could derail the project. So you want to really have processes and procedures established to handle those things that don't work according to plan. The worst thing to do is to try to solve a problem once the problem has already occurred. So it's being that proactive person And then for the people that have a task to complete, bringing them together and showing them how their task supports the entire project, and showing them what tasks are dependent upon on their completion of a task, but also what tasks need to be completed before they can do their work. And so giving them a bigger picture view, because oftentimes people, when you have things that are more task focused, people focus on the task and they don't pull themselves up from the big picture. And you lose awareness and you lose your ability to be proactive when you do that. Because if I know that I'm dependent on a task that you're doing, Charles, and you tell me, oh, Erica, I'm going to be 5 days late. And then I realize I can't start my task until you finish, then we might need to have a conversation. And it might say, Charles, how can I help you get this task done? And so that also builds relationships and it builds trust and accountability.
Trust and accountability. One of a few of the key components of leading an effective team. What are some of the experiences you've had around building trust and accountability in the team that helps them remember the bigger purpose of the project during times when things are not going as planned? From your perspective, what are some experiences that you can share with us?
Many, many years ago, I ended up being designated the lead for implementing Sarbanes-Oxley at the company I was working for. Sarbanes-Oxley was very new, and we had an aggressive mandate to achieve. We had to implement it in 12 months. And the only staff we had was my department, and there were 10 of us. And we had been given the guidance to read, and that's it. You know, because it was new, you didn't have best practices you could refer to. You didn't have external expertise that could help you. You couldn't phone a friend. So myself and the team, we sat back and we read through the guidance. And then I asked each person their perspective on what we should do. We agreed that we were going to take the financial statements, and for each line, we were going to identify the business processes that supported the numbers that appeared in that financial statement line. And so we created this huge whiteboard. It took up an entire wall. And for every financial statement line, we had all the business processes that supported that. And so then we started going to the people involved with the business processes and started collecting their business process flows, their internal controls. And we started doing walkthroughs to make sure the information we had was accurate and making adjustments as needed. And then out of that, we developed test plans, because with Sarbanes-Oxley, it was really internal controls based. And so we started testing the internal controls. However, people became very busy with their day-to-day work, and they were not necessarily always willing to meet with us, always completing tasks on time. But yet we were the team that had this 1-year mandate from the CEO of the company over our heads. And some of the team would say, we're never going to get this done, because every time someone said, not today, maybe next week, maybe next month, people became very disillusioned. And what I had to tell people was that we have a responsibility. We have been charged to execute this mission. And yes, we are not in a vacuum. We need other people to help us, but we have to focus on what we can do. And I said, if someone can't work today, then move on to another part of your assignment and get that done. And then we can try to catch up on the back end. And I said, also, when we completed each round of testing for each business process, we had celebrations. So for the person that was responsible for that work, we called them the person of the day, and we brought in their favorite snack, and we spent a half hour just celebrating that person. And whenever we reported our project status to leadership, we never solely focused on an individual, but we gave the group credit so that no one felt more supported, more encouraged than another. And we acknowledged that none of this is possible without each other. And we communicated that to leadership, and we talked about the team.
So you started identifying these, for lack of better terms, delays from people getting projects through the door. When you started having that conversation initially with them around other ways they can approach their work, how was the initial response from them?
They really said, we never thought of that, because we had a schedule. And this is another thing. We really work on plans, especially project plans. And so sometimes we get so caught up in the task and the due date that we don't see beyond that. So it's like we hit a brick wall when we can't get a task done. And then that brick wall stops us. And sometimes you have to take a step back and say, we have a challenge, but what else can we do?
Mm.
Because there's never nothing you can do.
Wow, there is nothing. It's such a good point to make, because it really takes being forward thinking in a lot of cases to be able to realize that, a brick wall in one area may not be a brick wall in the other, and being able to pivot. And I think then even being able to willingly accept that, hey, there are other alternatives here, because there's some people that may give you a hard time in those instances and actually not listen to what you're saying. But I wonder what was so unique in how you communicated that enabled them to actually listen, because there's a difference between a leader coming up and saying, hey, you're doing something wrong, and the mode at which that communication is passed on to people may just shut people off, where they might not even be interested in moving forward. What are some of the experiences you've had in communicating to people during those challenging times that gets them encouraged and almost influences them to even be inspired to keep moving the work forward?
So that starts before you hit the challenging time. And it's how I show up as a leader. One of the things that I am big on, because I'm a servant, is that I have to let people see my humanity, and I have to see theirs. So what that means is, whenever I start a new job or I get a new team member, I always set aside some time to meet with them. And in that meeting, I don't talk about the resume. I talk about the people, meaning myself and the other person. And I ask, what's your personality like? What frustrates you? What makes you happy? What do you like to do outside of work? What are you passionate about? And I share the same type of information. And what that does is it breaks down walls. It helps people see me outside of my title and position in the organization. And it also helps me see people outside of their title and outside of the fact that they're part of my team. And you can't always articulate everything that you are, but that is the first start. Then I am observant. Oftentimes, I have meetings and I speak when I need to, but in those meetings, I'm very much watching people. I want to see how people respond, because that shows me how they are and what type of person they are. And then that helps me relate to them better, because It's hard when you have a large team, but you have to recognize as a leader, your team is not homogeneous, it's heterogeneous. And so what works for one may not work for all. And I'm not saying you have to develop these highly individualized methods for engaging with people. But when you're speaking to the group, you have to remember, oh, Mary is more of a sensitive person. So I have to deliver this message with a bit more care. And I really need to choose my words wisely. Or like when you have a new position and you know that three people in your organization want that position, but you choose an external person, how do I develop communication that reaches them effectively and that addresses whatever disappointment they may have? And so it's the culture and the relationships that you start off with that builds the trust, that builds the rapport, so you can influence people. But it's also about giving people a space and place to be heard. So what that means is if I say something, if I say, here's what we're going to do, I then have to say, but before we move forward, does anyone have any other ideas or objections or concerns? Because then people feel comfortable with saying, I don't agree with that. And then you have to say, well, tell me more. And as a leader, you have to be willing to potentially move in another direction if your team member brings up something very valid.
Let me guess, you are enjoying the conversation. Well, if that's the case, share the episode with a family or friend. You never know who could be impacted by this conversation. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe so that you'll be the first to know whenever we release an episode. And take a screenshot of the episode and tag me on Instagram at Principled Mind so that way I will get to know you and also get to know what you think about the episode. All right, let's get back to the show. It makes me wonder to the earlier question that we kind of spoke on around you already having a vision established and someone comes into your team, a new person that to your point has a different perspective and for whatever reason challenges that vision. You're saying that it's okay for the leader to pretty much move a different direction, redefine the vision for their team or the organization depending on those perspectives.
It depends if the vision might be higher than me. So it might be coming from my leadership. In that case, I can't automatically pivot. But if I do see some validity, I can talk to my leadership and say, I was speaking with my team and one of the team members raised this point, and I think it's something as a leadership team we should consider. Now, if it's a vision that I own and that I've created, I have to look at, okay, this is a great idea. And is it possible for me to do a full pivot or a partial pivot? So everything doesn't have to be an all or nothing.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. From your perspective, any experiences that you've had around, or could you share moments with us when you were able to get people that were completely, struggling with accepting the vision? So they were part of the onset of the development of the vision, but for whatever reason, they had challenges with accepting the direction that you all were going as a team. I know you have led multiple projects and multiple initiatives in the various organizations that you've served, and I'm curious to hear from your perspective if you had those types of experiences and how you were able to manage those instances.
So when I started working for the Navy was just embarking on their audit readiness journey. And so in like the headquarters financial world, everyone was moving toward it. We were learning what we needed to do. We were developing plans. And we started going out to the uniform side of the Navy and started talking about, oh, well, when you buy something, you have to take the receipt and you have to enter into your receiving system and make sure that the quantity matches, that the price matches. And instantly, I was told I was crazy, that that was ridiculous. That is not something people out in the field do, that their greater role was to protect and defend this country, and they don't get mired down in paperwork. And it was a shock because I had never had someone set me down in such a very strong way. And I have to say, it took me a minute to recover from that because I continued to get some of the same feedback as I went across the country. And I really was like, I don't know if I'm up for this. It's one of the moments where you truly question your abilities as a leader. I said, this is too big for me. This is too hard. I'm never going to get these people to understand. And then I came to myself and said, no, you can do this. You have to be creative. So I said, what were some of the things I was told? And I was told I didn't understand what it was like to be in certain locations performing certain functions. So I said, well, that's the first thing I need to do. So I went back out to the people who weren't so nice to me. And I said, you know what? Let's start over again. I recognize from what you told me that perhaps I didn't have enough of your perspective in mind when we designed this approach. So can I spend some time with you doing your job? And so I spent days in different locations, learning different processes. And I did realize that my approach needed some refinement because they couldn't do what I was asking them to do in the way that I was asking them to do it. So after I learned from them, I said, you know what? I recognize I need to kind of go back to the drawing board. But I just want to ask you this. I know that this is new and this is not what you typically do. But here's why it should matter to you. And I created a value proposition for them. I said, you're not an accountant. I said, but let me just break this down simply. If we don't properly account for things, we may be overlooking some additional funding that could be used for your team to get the things you want and need. I said, so wouldn't that work for you? And they were like, well, yeah, extra. Who would turn down extra money so that we can better execute our mission? I said, so even though we have two different outcomes from this work, we can benefit if we work together. And so I got one organization on board. And then when they started having successes, I made them my champion. And so I started getting them to spread the word to other people in uniform because, again, people from the same environment tend to listen to each other more than external individuals. And so I had this message, going on. And then I shared it with leaderships. Hey, this command is out here doing great things. And people wanted the applause, they wanted the attention. So then people started calling me, hey, well, how can I be part of this? And so it took me listening to the feedback that I was getting, no matter how loud it was. It took my willingness to say, that probably wasn't the right approach, and let me think of something else. It took me building a partnership and relationship with people. It took me being willing to understand someone else's perspective. It took me being able to create a value proposition for people as to why something should matter to them. And it also took me celebrating small wins and then leveraging that to inspire others.
Before you decided to take these steps to completely change the narrative for this particular project, Why do you think your initial reaction was to recoil and wonder if you were the right fit, if you were actually the right person to be able to move this forward? Or why was that the initial reaction for you?
Because I had never been met with such harsh resistance before. And in the moment, I didn't know what to do. And so sometimes, especially in your professional career, where you don't really get knocked down, the first knockdown is pretty brutal. And you don't have any experience to draw from. You can't say, oh, well, I did this before because this hasn't happened before. So I think as human beings, we turn to the self doubt. You feel like this happened because maybe I'm not equipped for this. And I couldn't even in the moment fix this. And even a day after, I still didn't know what to do. And as human beings, those experiences are unavoidable. But what is avoidable is allowing them to stop you. And I had to pull myself up and say, what's next? Like, I can't walk away from this job. And then I said, I would not have been given this responsibility if I couldn't do it. But also, it was, what do I believe about myself? And it's not in an arrogant way, but it's recognizing what you have within you and how you can use it to move forward. And that's kind of how I came out of this. And I had to develop some tough skin. And I had to set myself up for believing I may not get a yes when I go back out again. I'm going to have to go out 5 times before I get that yes, but I'm going to continue to go.
What did you believe about yourself as you were reflecting?
I believe that I was intelligent, that I could build good relationships with people, and that I don't quit.
How long did it take you to reach this realization before you went back out to the field?
Probably about 30 days.
Really? Did it take you talking to anyone to get to that space? Or you just needed time to yourself?
So it was a combination of both. First, I had to talk to myself. I really had to start telling myself I needed to move forward. I was not going to look for another job. And then once I started believing in myself, then I had to reflect on what could I have done differently. And that took me taking all that feedback I was given and the reasons why people didn't want to do, the reasons why people said it was ridiculous. And I had to turn them around into opportunities. I had to say, well, how would I speak to this? How could I change? Point number one. And when I had all that articulated, I went to my leadership and said, full transparency moment here. Here's what happened. Here's how I'm feeling, how I was feeling. Here's how I feel now. And here's how I want to move forward. Is there anything else that I should consider? And they gave me a few additional tidbits and they said, go forth and do great things.
How important was that conversation to build in the confidence that you then had to reconnect or re-engage with the group?
So I think for me, the conversation was more about number one, getting confirmation that I was on the right path. Because I knew that I only had so many opportunities to make this right with the people I was going to work with. But also, I felt like because I had great leaders and because they trusted me, I needed to be honest. I could not, just go out here and try to turn the situation on a dime without telling someone where I was and how it didn't go well. And oftentimes people feel like leadership expects them to be perfect, that we can't be vulnerable. And you can be, but you have to come with a solution. And so even leaders, they make mistakes, they get stuck in spaces and places. So it's not unrealistic for staff to be in that position. And they respected me a lot for being honest. And I think that people don't realize people respect honesty a lot more than we think. Now, it's what you're honest about, of course. Like there's certain things that might not be appropriate, but when you're professional with your honesty and genuine and authentic, people respect you.
That is powerful. Erica, you've been incredibly inspiring through the conversations we've had here today. We've talked about how you define a vision. We've talked about how you create some practical actions that people can actually take today if they needed to create a vision for their team or for the organization. We've talked about the challenges that people face, leaders face, when starting a project and you realize that a vision that you have created, not everyone is aligned to that vision, and how to get them back on track. You've also shared with us here today some of the actions that one can take when folks join your organization and realize that they are not in alignment to the vision currently in place. All these are challenges that leaders face on a day-to-day basis, especially for people who are starting projects for the first time, people who are even starting companies for the first time. Is how do I ensure that this thing I'm building, one, is feasible, but I can actually get people who can stand behind this and move this forward. And all these great insights are insights that anyone listening here can learn from and take with them as they continue to move forward in your career. I know certainly that I will. So thank you so much for sharing that. One thing that comes to mind is, as you've been talking for the past couple of minutes now, is how introspective you are and self-aware you are, and your willingness to express humility in speaking to people, to even validate your idea, even when you are in a position of leadership. Because a lot of people believe, to your point, that leaders know it all. They know it all. They need to be perfect. They can never make any mistakes. And it's in instances like the examples that you've shared that challenges leaders to, in some cases, rethink their approach. And you showing humility, you being willing to say, hey, I've made a mistake and this is my approach to correcting it. It just makes me wonder if you've been like this since childhood. So the question I have for you is, when you reflect on, yourself growing up, what are some of the experiences growing up that contributed to the mindset that you have today?
So when I was in first grade, I attended a private school where I was the only African-American person. I went to that school for 3 years. And when you're young, you don't necessarily understand everything that's going on around you, because you're still excited about the new toy, your favorite TV show, and going to play. That the reality of your world doesn't hit you like it does as an adult. And my mother used to always send me off to school and tell me, you're so smart, you get good grades, go in to school and show everybody just how smart you are. And so I did that every day. And I got good grades, and I had a few friends. And one day I got invited to a classmate's birthday party. And again, I was the only African-American child at the party, but I had been to other classmates' parties, so it was just par for the course. But this time, there was a neighbor of my classmate, and we were all playing and laughing, and I was having a great time. And the neighbor, who was around our age, said to my classmate, "She doesn't belong here. She's Black." And the whole party stopped. And everybody was just like caught off guard. And the neighbor said, "You should make her go home." And I burst into tears. And I kept hearing, "She doesn't belong here. She doesn't belong here." And the young lady's mother came and she tried to calm me down. And I just wouldn't calm down. So they called my mother. And I told my mother and my classmate's mother what happened. And the classmate's mother apologized and was like, that's not who we are. So my mother sat down and had the difficult talk with me. And she said, never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. And she said, always remember who you are and what you have and what you bring to the table. And resting in that confidence allows me to be humble because I know that it doesn't take anything away from me if I admit I made a mistake. It makes me willing to be vulnerable and transparent with people. It makes me comfortable in sharing certain things about myself with my colleagues because none of those things take away from who I am. And I stand in that.
You don't belong. When you tell that story, how does it make you feel today?
It makes me honestly wish I could find that little girl and show her where I do belong and what I've accomplished, and that her words didn't hinder me. And people are always going to have opinions and perspectives, but it doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean that it's true. I tell people, self-esteem is not contingent upon other people because that word self means it comes from you.
What are two pieces of advice you would give your younger self, and what would you encourage Erica today?
To my younger self, I would say self-esteem comes from self and not other people. And what other people often have to say is noise. And I would say reach for the stars because you just might get there. Because where I am today is nothing I would have ever thought of in my younger days.
Do you have a vision of where you want to go?
I really want to, of course, continue to grow professionally in my career, but also I really want to spend more time coaching people because I really believe that success is inherent within each and every person. But the reason why people are not always successful is they don't have the right people around them, helping them to identify what's within them and showing them how to pull it out and use it for their good.
What would you encourage Erica today? You've talked about the two pieces of advice you would have for your younger self, but what is it that you would want to encourage Erica today?
Give yourself some grace. Sometimes I can push myself and I can overload my plate, taking on sometimes too much, feeling like sometimes I have to do all this, but just give yourself some grace. It's okay to dial back.
What's exciting you? Do you have something exciting coming up for you right now? I know you just got certified as a coach. First of all, a huge congratulations
Thank you.
for that huge accomplishment. I know it's something you're really passionate about. So, excited to know what's coming up next for you.
Vacation.
I love that. Do you have a place in mind? Do you have an area?
So I'm taking a couple of vacations for the rest of this year. I'm spending time with my best friend that I talked about earlier. I'm leaving this week to go spend a couple of days with her in South Carolina. Then I have another good friend that I hadn't seen in 2 years. I'm going to Atlanta. And then hopefully before the end of the year, I will spend some time on the beach in Miami.
Oh, that is you have a packed schedule, but it's well needed. You work really hard, and it's well deserved with all the efforts that you put in to move things forward within your organization. It's amazing the work that you've done, the impact that you've had on people, and I'm just incredibly excited for what is to come for you, Erica. Repeat and complete the sentence. I have a principled mind because
I have a principled mind because I am committed to doing the right thing.
Where can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Your name, Erica Gaddy? That's it on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Erica, it has been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining the Principal Minds podcast. And as much as I have learned from this conversation with you today, I'm hoping there's someone out there who take one thing, just one thing at a minimum that can truly help them, one, become a better leader, but also become a better human. So thanks for sharing this space, this virtual space with me here today, Erica.
And thank you for the invitation. And I wish you much success in your path with this podcast. It is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.